The aroma of freshly ground coffee wafted through the dimly lit kitchen. The clock showed 5:30 a.m. Through the window, a faint light filtered in before the sunrise. In the kitchen of an aging single-family home, a mother worked quietly and methodically. Linda Watson was carefully making sandwiches, just as she did every morning. She tucked fresh tuna and crisp lettuce between slices of bread, then lovingly wrote, "Jake," on a brown paper bag, her handwriting carrying a gentle roundness. Her practiced hands washed an apple and placed it in a Tupperware container. "Tuna sandwich and apple today, Jake's favorites," she murmured to herself with a smile. Working in Walmart's accounting department for 8 years, she managed to support their life on a modest salary. Between her annual income of $42,000 and child support from her ex-husband, they were making ends meet. After her divorce 3 years ago, there had been no settlement, and the monthly mortgage payment of $1,200 was a heavy burden, but Linda never gave up. With her slender frame and shoulder-length brown hair, she was a 34-year-old mother who carried a strong core beneath her gentle demeanor. In the early morning kitchen, she sometimes found herself thinking about her ex-husband. He had been a successful accountant who left with a younger colleague. But Linda had no regrets. There was a genuine pride in her current life. "Jake, time to wake up," Linda gently knocked on her son's second-floor bedroom door. The sleeping 9-year-old looked like an angel in his bed. Science experiment books were neatly arranged on his bookshelf, and a half-read Sherlock Holmes lay on his desk. "Good morning, Mom," Jake smiled at Linda while rubbing his sleepy eyes. Even after the divorce, her son had maintained an remarkably cheerful disposition. A fourth grader who loved science experiments and reading, he maintained above-average grades. "Did you finish your homework?" Linda asked, and Jake nodded proudly. During breakfast in the kitchen, Jake happily exclaimed while eating his Cheerios, "Mom, I'm looking forward to today's sandwich. I can smell the tuna." Those words warmed Linda's heart. Watching her son head off to school, she called out, "Be careful." It was one of life's small daily joys. However, this peaceful routine was disrupted one afternoon, about a month and a half into the fall semester. Something seemed off about Jake when he came home. He didn't greet her with his usual cheerful, "I'm home." When Linda asked, "Jake, where's your lunchbox?" he avoided her gaze and answered, "Oh, sorry. I forgot it." There was a tremor of weakness in his voice. A few days later, another unused lunchbox returned home. The sandwich inside was barely touched. She also noticed his uniform getting gradually looser. While folding laundry over the weekend, she realized his pants waist had become noticeably loose. Worried, Linda consulted with Mary, a PTA friend. "It might be the start of puberty," Mary dismissed it lightly. "My kid also lost his appetite when he was in 4th grade." However, a mother's intuition warned that something more serious might be happening. She found herself stopping more frequently outside her son's room after school, imagining him reading alone behind the door. The occasional sighs she heard. Linda made up her mind. She would trust her son and watch over him carefully. But in her heart, an inexplicable anxiety had begun to take root. 5 a.m., before the alarm clock rang. Linda awoke as usual. The streetlight filtering through the curtain gap cast faint shadows in the quiet room. However, just as she was about to turn on the kitchen light, she heard a small sound behind her. Tiny footsteps, like those of a small animal. Turning around, she saw Jake in his pajamas, standing halfway up the stairs. In the dim light, his blue pajamas seemed to float like a ghost. This was a time when he would normally be sound asleep. "Jake? What's wrong?" Her mother's voice broke the silence. Her son stared at his feet and said in a thin voice, "Mom, you don't need to make lunch anymore." His voice wavered like a flickering flame. Those words pierced Linda's heart like a cold wind. Why? The kitchen clock seemed to tick unusually loudly. "I want to get school lunch," Jake's voice trembled. On the darkened stairs, she could see something glistening in her son's eyes. Linda took a step toward her son. The creaking floorboard seemed to stretch this moment into eternity. However, Jake backed away, saying, "Sorry," before rushing back upstairs. Only the heavy air and the memory of her son's tears gleaming in the morning darkness remained. That day at Walmart felt longer than usual. Under the fluorescent lights, while working on register calculations, Linda's mind was filled with thoughts of her son. The voices of shoppers and the beeping of product barcodes seemed to come from far away. During her lunch break, she pulled out a small note from her uniform pocket in the employee bathroom. Numbers hastily scribbled on a yellow sticky note. It showed her son's weight records from that morning. A 6-pound decrease in 2 weeks. Her hand trembled as she stared at the numbers. Her reflection in the mirror felt like a stranger's. "Linda, are you okay?" Her colleague Janet approached with concern. The veteran employee of 20 years seemed to see right through her. "It's about my son," Linda began, and Janet's expression turned serious. "My kid too, in middle school, bullying." Those words weighed heavily on Linda's heart. Just then, her phone rang in her pocket. The screen showed Lincoln Elementary School. Her heart skipped a beat. "Mrs. Watson, could you please come urgently?" The teacher's voice on the receiver had lost its usual calmness. School announcements echoing in the background. And somewhere distant, children's voices. Linda was in the middle of her shift, but she explained the situation to her supervisor and got permission to leave early. "Family comes first," her supervisor's words made her nod, though her chest felt crushed with anxiety. While driving, various possibilities swirled in her mind. An accident. An injury. Or. At every red light, her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The autumn leaves by the roadside looked blood red. At the school, Ms. Brown was waiting in front of the principal's office. The usually calm expression was absent from her face beneath her gray cardigan. "We've been waiting for you," her voice carried an apologetic tone. The voices of teachers conducting classes echoed through the hallway. In the monitoring room, Mr. Smith, a stern-looking male teacher, was also waiting. His freshly tied necktie suggested something serious was about to unfold. Multiple monitor screens on the wall showed different areas of the school. "Regarding the footage we're about to show you," Mr. Smith began carefully choosing his words. The tension in his voice made the room's atmosphere heavy. The screen displayed security camera footage. Thursday, October 12th, 12:15 p.m. Near the second-floor north bathroom. At first, just an ordinary hallway scene. Then suddenly, three upperclassmen in expensive uniforms burst into view. Behind them, a small shadow desperately trying to escape. Linda's chest tightened. Without a doubt, it was Jake. Her son, cornered in the bathroom. Outside, three boys taking turns standing guard. Cold smiles on their faces as they held smartphones. And for 30 minutes. Even after the bell rang for the next class, her son couldn't come out. The security camera mercilessly recorded it all. "Mrs. Watson, we're terribly sorry. This appears to have been going on for a month." Mr. Smith's voice seemed to come from far away. Linda's vision blurred. Ms. Brown supported her swaying body. The warmth of her hand only made reality hit harder. In her mind, recent events played like a film reel. The uneaten lunches. The weight loss. The dark expression. And this morning's words. Everything fit together like pieces of a cruel puzzle. "In the bathroom, my son." Linda's voice broke off. She desperately held back a sob rising in her throat. "Yes." "It seems he was being forced to throw away his lunch." Mr. Smith's voice sounded distant. The tissue box on the desk seemed unusually vivid. The wall clock ticked quietly. 2:45 p.m. Through Lincoln Elementary School's windows, the autumn sunlight still streamed in. Outside, children's voices could be heard from PE class. But Linda's world had been plunged into darkness in an instant. "Please, bring my son here," Linda said in a trembling voice. But her eyes already held a strong determination. A mother's instinct was awakening, along with deep anger. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. "This cannot be overlooked." Her voice no longer trembled. Ms. Brown nodded quietly. Determination showed in her eyes too. "Yes, Mrs. Watson. We feel the same way." In the heavy air of the monitoring room, a mother's resolve for justice was quietly but surely taking shape. A heavy atmosphere hung in the student guidance room. 3 files lay on the desk. The 6th grade students accused of bullying. Looking at their photographs, Linda let out a deep sigh. The top file read Billy Thompson. The only son from a family that ran Thompson and Associates, Ohio's most prestigious law firm. An exemplary student with excellent grades. But behind that smile, something dark seemed to lurk. The Thompson family makes substantial annual donations, Mr. Smith explained quietly. However, in exchange, he's always under pressure. His hesitation revealed complex circumstances. The second file, Mark Anderson. Father, a cardiac surgeon at the city's major hospital. Mother, a full-time homemaker. 7 days of scheduled activities per week. Piano, swimming, soccer, English conversation, programming, chess, Chinese. The schedule was packed solid. Anderson barely has any free time, Ms. Brown added. His parents have always demanded perfection. The third was Steve Clark. Father, an investment banker. Mother, a yoga instructor. Perhaps influenced by his mother's obsession with social media followers, he was required to post on Instagram 3 times a week. As they reviewed the security camera footage repeatedly, the boys' methods became clear. Planned ambushes during lunch breaks. A rotating guard system. Threats with recorded videos. Using different bathrooms to avoid detection. The adults were speechless at the level of planning. Why was my son targeted? To Linda's question, Mr. Parker, the homeroom teacher, responded, "It started in science class in September. It had been an incredibly trivial incident. During an experiment about separating mixtures, when Billy explained the wrong procedure, Jake pointed out the correct method. Her son received praise from the teacher. And Billy faced classmates' laughter. How dare a lower grader?" Those words were the beginning of everything. When Linda met her son lying on the infirmary bed, her heart felt like it would burst. "I'm sorry, Mom," Jake began in a thin voice. "I didn't want to waste the lunches." The incident in the science room. The moment the bullying began. "At first they just wrote on my desk," he continued in a trembling voice. "But that was okay because I could just erase it. Then the violence escalated. They would ambush me in the bathroom." Jake's words caught in his throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" Linda asked. "I didn't want you to worry." Those words made his mother's tears flow. "I didn't want to cause trouble for anyone." Her son's excessive kindness squeezed her heart even tighter. At 5 p.m., an emergency staff meeting was held. Principal Robertson bowed deeply. "Our responsibility in overlooking this situation is grave," his solemn voice echoed through the conference room. But Linda's anger hadn't subsided. "Please show me specific countermeasures," her voice carried unwavering determination. Immediate parent meeting, apology from the perpetrator group, concrete prevention measures, her demands were clear. "My son's lunch contains my love," Linda stood up and said. "The lunch I make at 5 a.m. every morning. The name I write on his sandwich. The time I spend carefully washing apples. All of these contain my prayers." Her voice shook. But she continued. "I absolutely cannot allow acts that trample on those feelings." The conference room fell silent. The principal opened his mouth heavily. "Let's contact the parents of the bullying group." However, the initial responses weren't positive. "My son. You must be joking," Mrs. Thompson's voice was cold. "There must be some misunderstanding," Mr. Anderson questioned. "But they look so friendly on social media." Mrs. Clark refused to believe. "Then, shall we view the security camera footage?" No one could argue with the principal's words. An emergency parent meeting was scheduled for the next day. At dusk, Linda embraced her son as they headed home. The autumn wind gently caressed their hair. "Mom," Jake whispered softly. "Yes." "Can I still go to school tomorrow?" At those words, Linda hugged her son even tighter. "Of course you can. I'll protect you, I promise." The auditorium at Lincoln Elementary School was filled with tense air. At 6 p.m., as the sun began to set, parents gathered one after another. This place, usually filled with children's cheerful voices, was now wrapped in an unusual silence. A long table was set up on the stage, with Principal Robertson at the center, surrounded by faculty members. School counselor Jennifer Wise was also present. Her 20 years of experience would be tested tonight. At the back of the venue, parents whispered among themselves. To think, the Thompson boy. Anderson, that honor student. The Clark family always posts such harmonious photos on social media. Rumors rippled through the crowd. 6:15 p.m. The last to enter were the parents of the three perpetrators. Mr. Thompson in his expensive suit, Dr. Anderson still in his white coat, Mrs. Clark in her yoga wear. Each symbolizing different social status. Thank you for gathering here despite your busy schedules, the principal's voice echoed through the microphone. However, his words seemed to slide across the surface of ice, not reaching hearts. The screen displayed a brief explanation about the upcoming footage. To parents, the following footage contains disturbing content. That warning generated even more tension. The moment the security camera footage began playing, the venue held its breath. A small shadow cornered in the bathroom. Upperclassmen standing guard. Bold smiles as they held smartphones. 30 minutes of confinement. The entirety of the footage was shown without mercy. Stop it. A sudden cry. Mrs. Thompson stood up. There's no need to see more. Her arrogant attitude was nowhere to be seen. As she collapsed to her knees, her husband rushed to her side. Dr. Anderson covered his face with both hands, his shoulders trembling slightly. Beside him, Mrs. Clark clutched her smartphone, staring blankly at the screen. Our sons, Billy said in a small voice. The venue's attention turned to the three boys standing on stage. We did it. That confession caused a stir in the room. But why? The question came from the fourth-grade parent representative. At that inquiry, the children's confessions began to pour out like a broken dam. Dad always says, "Don't embarrass us." Billy's voice trembled. When I made a mistake in science class and everyone laughed. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't say I wanted to skip the activities. Mark continued. I didn't know any other way to be recognized except by being praised by teachers. Perfect photos on Instagram every day. Steve's words trailed off. If I could control someone else, it felt like I wasn't being controlled. The parents' expressions gradually changed. Eyes of condemnation slowly shifted to sympathy and self-reflection. That's when Linda slowly stood up. She walked quietly from the back of the auditorium to the stage. Only her footsteps broke the silence. I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, Linda's voice resonated through the venue. To make my son's lunch. Making sandwiches, washing apples, writing his name with love. That was my pride as a mother. She paused for a moment and surveyed the room. But that lunch was thrown on the bathroom floor. My son carried unspoken fear every day. Why couldn't we notice? Linda turned to face the perpetrator's parents. Your children have wonderful talents. But aren't those talents bound by chains called expectations? Our demands for perfect grades. The ideal family image on social media. Days packed with activities. Is that really what makes our children happy? At those words, many parents lowered their heads. This is an issue for all of us adults. Linda's voice grew stronger. Our children are suffering under the pressure of our expectations. The atmosphere in the venue gradually shifted. Tears began to fall from mothers' eyes. Fathers nodded deeply, lost in thought. The faculty members listened with serious expressions. School counselor Ms. Wise stood up. "Let me propose specific measures," she began explaining in a composed voice. Introduction of a new anti-bullying program. Establishment of weekly counseling systems. Increasing the number of school counselors. Implementation of educational programs for parents. And regular individual interviews by faculty members. No one objected to these proposals. "Would your son please come forward?" Linda called out quietly. Jake timidly climbed onto the stage. When he faced the three boys who had bullied him, the venue held its breath. However, Jake spoke unexpected words. "You guys are all good at science, right?" At those words, the three boys looked up. "Would you like to do experiments together sometime?" That pure suggestion brought small sobs from the audience. Mrs. Thompson stood up and approached her son. "Billy, don't you have something to say to Jake?" "I'm really sorry," Billy's voice trembled. The other two boys also bowed deeply. "From now on," Jake said in a small voice, "I hope we can be friends." At those words, the expressions of the boys on stage gradually softened. 8:30 p.m., the long parent meeting was drawing to a close. The autumn moon cast a gentle light on the schoolyard. As people were leaving, Mr. Thompson approached Linda. "Mrs. Watson," his voice no longer carried any arrogance. "The medical expenses for your son, and future psychological counseling. We'll take full responsibility for all of it." Linda quietly shook her head. "This isn't about money. I only wish that this becomes an opportunity for the children to develop true friendship." The footsteps of people leaving the auditorium echoed quietly. From tomorrow, this school would take a new step forward. The second hand on the wall clock ticked steadily toward a future filled with hope. 3 months later in January, Lincoln Elementary School was bathed in gentle winter sunlight. Light streaming through the school building's windows created golden bands in the hallways. The expressions on the children walking through them had clearly changed from before. "Good morning, Jake." Billy, the sixth grader, called out while running down the stairs. "Looking forward to today's science experiment." Jake responded with a beaming smile. "Today we're experimenting with solutions." School counselor Ms. Wise had been keeping detailed records of the changes over these 3 months. The transformation of the former perpetrators was particularly remarkable. Billy Thompson hadn't missed a single weekly counseling session. There, he began to speak about his true dream for the first time. "I want to become a chef." It was a moment when he, expected to inherit his father's law firm, began to have his own will. "The first breakfast my son made for me," Mrs. Thompson tearfully shared at the parent meeting. "Slightly burnt toast and half-cooked sunny-side-up eggs. But I've never had such a delicious meal." Even her husband, undefeated in court, was pressing his fingertips to his eyes at that moment. For Mark Anderson, change manifested differently. He reduced his 7 activities to 3 by his own choice. "I want to play baseball," he said. His parents were initially bewildered by these words, but seeing their son's shining eyes, they slowly nodded. Now Mark dedicates himself to school team practice after classes. His formerly strict and rigid personality has gradually regained its softness. "The feeling of throwing a ball with all my might is the best," he says with a genuine smile that brings true relief to his parents' faces. Steve Clark's change was even more dramatic. Freed from his social media obsession, he found time to spend in the library. "In the world of books, there are no like buttons," he happily explains his new discovery. "But the likes in your heart are unlimited." His mother, Mrs. Clark, also changed significantly. There was now an authentic image of a family that had stopped pretending to be perfect. Even more surprisingly, Steve began helping younger students with their studies after school. "By teaching, I learn too," he said, impressing the faculty members. Jake's birthday took an unexpected turn. As always, Linda made a special lunch with love. Tuna sandwich, apple, and homemade chocolate brownies. There, "Dear Jake," was written with a mother's feelings. When he opened his lunch in the classroom, classmates naturally gathered around. Then, there were unexpected visitors. Billy, Mark, and Steve peeked nervously into the classroom. "Let's eat together," Jake's words wrapped the classroom in warm air. Children pulled their desks together and sat in a circle. Former conflicts were nowhere to be seen. "Hey, these brownies are amazing." Billy's eyes sparkled. "Could I get the recipe?" That evening, Linda was called to the faculty room. Mrs. Watson, the principal, announced with a gentle expression, "Our school's initiatives are going to be recognized by the County Board of Education. They would become a model case for successful anti-bullying programs at other schools. This is all thanks to your courage," Ms. Brown added. But Linda quietly shook her head. "No, it's because the children's hearts changed. And because we adults truly faced our children for the first time." The season was approaching the end of winter. The morning light was gradually taking on spring's softness. As always at 5 a.m., Linda stood in the kitchen. Small footsteps approached from behind. "Mom, good morning," Jake said, still rubbing his sleepy eyes in his pajamas. "I'm looking forward to today's lunch." At those words, Linda couldn't help but hug her son. It was warm. Unlike that dark morning 3 months ago, there was a definite warmth here. Outside the window, an early spring breeze gently swayed the trees. Street lights twinkled under the still dark sky. The rising sun would surely bring new hope. "Hey, Mom," Jake said in a small voice. "This Saturday, Billy and the others are gathering at the park. We're going to show each other science experiments." His eyes shone with expectation. "We're having a picnic too. I'd like to bring your sandwiches." Linda smiled gently. "Of course. I'll make plenty." A warm atmosphere flowed between mother and child. This kitchen was the same place as 3 months ago. But the feelings that filled it had become completely different. The science grade sheet displayed in the classroom. 6 names lined up at the top. Jake, Billy, Mark, Steve, and 2 new friends who had joined them. After school, they gather in the library to plan experiments. Their absorbed discussions make them look as if they had always been best friends. Early spring sunlight streamed into Lincoln Elementary School's building. Bright voices of children echoed in the hallways, and serious learning could be seen in the classrooms. There wasn't a trace of the dark shadows from before. The second hand on the wall clock ticked quietly onward. It marked the time when wounded hearts healed and new bonds were nurtured. The small miracle that happened at this school would surely be passed on to the next generation.